Hello and welcome to Esoteric Discussions with me, your host, Valentine St. Alban, a show where we go deep down into the rabbit hole. You can catch me every other Wednesday evening from 9 here on Peterborough FM and online. If you want to learn more about me, please visit my website at www.valentinesaintalban.co.uk. It's the 2nd of November 2011 and we are only 8 weeks away from the start of 2012. Well, I was told that I gave a very good presentation last week at Peterborough Central Library to wrap up Black History Month. Black British history is another area that has been hidden and misrepresented from mainstream society. The truth is, there has been a black presence here in the UK going back as far as people here. And so I gave a concise introduction to this history, looking at ancient folklore and historical sources across the centuries. So that was a lot of fun. But I don't know about you, but personally, I'm really looking forward to 2012. I've been sitting back, quietly monitoring things, monitoring the moods of those who I know who don't quite see the world as I see it. And I'm beginning to see a slight difference. Those who may not be as in tune to the changing world we live in are no longer fighting me in the same way they used to. Not that I ever try to push my opinions onto others, as I believe we are all entitled to believe what we'd like. But let's say that they're more ready to hear what I have to say. I still don't believe the majority of people out there are truly understanding what they are seeing. The full recognition and anger is still, in my opinion, to come. The media is still playing their card, trying to put on a brave face and confirming that all is okay, even though many of us know this is not true. I was watching, which I don't really do very often, I was watching mainstream news yesterday, and, I like to do that from time to time just to keep my eye on what's going on out there and how they're actually presenting it. And they were talking about these promising growth figures for the last quarter, which we've just now wrapped up. And, I was looking at the news and I was wondering what these great figures are for the growth. I was expecting to hear something kind of radical or fantastic, and they came out with we've grown by 0.5%, which is up from 0.1% from the last quarter. And I thought, wow, well, and they're saying this 0.5% is basically helping us to avoid going back into another recession. I mean, are people really buying this stuff? I mean, to be honest, I don't know what the average person out there is actually thinking. But I know that I'm not buying it. So that's why I feel the Occupy Wall Street movements that have flared up in America and now spilling into the streets elsewhere is a welcome relief, because I have to say, I've been watching the astrology and surveying the mood of people, as I said, and to be honest, the two weren't adding up. Now, I know the astrology is always spot on, so it was either a case of the media not reporting the discontent and protest movements, or people have been very slow to open their eyes and voice their opinions. I personally think it has been a combination of both situations, where the media has not been reporting the protest movements and discontent, but also people have been slow to voice their opinions. But what we have now is we currently have the protesters outside of St. Paul's Cathedral, which has caused it to close its doors for the time being. They're quoting health and safety issues. This is a peaceful protest, and it's causing quite a dilemma for the church officials, with certain leaders resigning. And I believe the last I had heard yesterday was the protesters would be evicted by force if necessary, but in the same breath, this was retracted. So, these peaceful protests are causing quite a problem, as they are not being destructive or causing a riot. So they can't name and shame individuals like they did during the student protest last year, and also the UK riots that took place over the summertime, because they've not been causing a nuisance. They've not been rioting and looting on the streets. So how else can they be handled? Of course, we have to ask, why should it be legal to gather and protest for a common cause? We live in a democracy, don't we? That's what we've been told. Great Britain is a democracy. It's only deemed illegal to gather in groups in fascist dictatorships or countries where there are basically no rights. So, we're finally seeing in the last quarter of 2011 people beginning to have a voice across the globe. People have been losing jobs, their homes, and, they're finally seeing the injustices that are being perpetrated by the bankers who run the world and our governments that answer to them. So this is why I personally am very excited about 2012 and interested to see where all of this is going. I'm especially excited to see where we will be next year this time. And now, I have in other shows, in the introduction, discussed Pluto in Capricorn, but this time I just want to briefly touch on Uranus in Aries, because many of these mass protests we are seeing, such as the Arab Spring, the Wall Street occupation, the protests we have seen on the streets of Greece and Portugal and many other places, are reflecting the astrology that is taking place right now. So, Uranus moved out of Pisces and into the fiery sign of Aries. That was in late May 2010. Now, he didn't stay in Aries for long last year, and he went into what we call in astrology a retrograde motion, where he appears to be moving backwards, but he's not actually moving backwards. The planet's not actually moving backwards. But nevertheless, it went back into Pisces during the latter part of 2010. But then by March the 11th of this year, in 2011, actually the day that we had the Japanese earthquake, Uranus moved back into Aries, and this planet is now going to be in the sign of Aries. Aries, of course, was the god of war, and Uranus will be there for the next 7 years. He's going to be doing a 7-year tour. So here we have Uranus, the Great Awakener, the planet of change and rebellion in Aries, and the Arab Spring, with uprisings breaking out in earnest across the Middle East. And as far as I'm concerned, this was certainly by no accident. And again, another demonstration of the built-in divinity that of the timing of how astrology actually works. So we are currently at the cusp of some very life-altering years. Uranus teaches us to challenge society's status quo rather than blindly accept what we are told. And, I think this encapsulates the mood of what is beginning to be seen on the streets out there. So, as I've said, all very exciting things, very exciting time. That's what everybody's always telling us. And, finally, I think we might be getting there. Still a very long road to go. Maybe a bit of chaos coming our ways as more people are beginning to awaken to their rights, and the powers that be most likely won't be happy about this. So a lot to look forward to, I think, for the future in terms of us trying to empower ourselves and create the world that we really want to create. So tonight, I have a great show, as I always do. I'm going to be joined by Andy Thomas, who is the author of a fantastic book called The Truth Agenda. And I feel this book really has its hand on the pulse of what is going on out there. It's a very well-written book, and I highly urge all of you to purchase a copy. So we're going to be having a great discussion on some of the topics Andy has methodically covered in his book, and where we stand with things now. So sit back. It's going to be a great show. We're going to take a short break, and when I return, I'll be joined by Andy Thomas.
That we have left, we want to talk right down to earth.
Hello and welcome back to Esoteric Discussions with me, your host. I am Valentine St. Aubin. That was Living Colour with Cult of Personality. I almost feel actually guilty cutting in right there because that's a very terrific guitar solo he was doing. But we need to get on with the show because we can quickly run out of time. And I've got a great guest tonight, as I introduced earlier in the show. My guest tonight is Andy Thomas, who is the author of a book called The Truth Agenda. He's written other books as well. Just a bit of information about Andy. He is a leading researcher into unexplained mysteries and political truth issues, and is the author of the acclaimed The Truth Agenda, which I was telling you about, which explores the link between paranormal phenomena, global cover-ups, and ancient prophecies for our times. His many other books include Vital Signs, described widely as the definitive guide to the controversial crop circle phenomenon. Andy is founder of Changing Times, which holds events on mysteries and truth issues, and also runs Vital Signs Publishing. He writes and lectures in Britain and around the world and has made numerous radio and TV appearances, and we're very lucky to have him with us tonight. I'm just going to open up his mic. Andy, are you with us?
I'm here. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I have to say, your book, Truth Agenda, I found it to be absolutely amazing, and I personally think you should be rewarded for a PhD for the work that you've put into it. I mean, it's just so in depth and concise, you know.
Well, I mean, the problem that we have is that there are so many ideas out there at the moment that are considered to be in the what people call alternative realms.
Yeah.
It's very hard to know where to start.
Yeah.
And even I was finding it hard to recommend to people a place to start. And so I thought, well, perhaps I better write something myself. And that was really the seed of it. Based on presentations that I've been giving for quite a few years, I kind of tried to encapsulate as much as possible so that you could hand this book to people and say, well, look, you want to know what all this is about, mysteries, cover-ups, conspiracies, ancient prophecies, here it is, in between, one cover. So that was the intention. I mean, so far, I'm pleased to say, the reaction seems to suggest that, it works, that people are sort of passing it around as a great place to get a sort of source for all of these things in one book. So, yeah, it's always nice to know that it's worked.
How many years did it actually take you to put a manuscript like that together? I mean, I couldn't even imagine how you go about really trying to pull all of this diverse information together, because it's just such a expansive work. It's basically, like an encyclopedia, a compendium of sorts of, all of the different conspiracy theories that relate to us and, in our times, as you say, movements, political movements, issues, events, prophecies, so much stuff there.
Well, I mean, the genesis of the book really was in the presentations that I gave, because, as you mentioned earlier, I had started off investigating things like crop circles and UFOs and all of this, but it gradually expanded out as the years went by, and so I, started to give presentations where I had to think, okay, what do people want to hear about? What would work well? So that, in a way, created a structure that when I then came to start to write it down, I knew sort of the areas to go for, what people responded to, what they didn't respond to. And so, I mean, the actual writing of the book, I guess, was probably about 2 years. Yeah. But the actual research obviously goes back a lot longer than that.
It's like a lifetime, isn't it, really?
I guess, in a way.
All of your interests, yeah.
For sure.
So, I mean, who would you say the book is actually written for? Is it written for those who are trying to understand where to start? Is that sort of the main audience who you find have been picking up the book? Or are you finding people like ourselves picking up the book who have been into these things for quite some time? In terms of when you're out doing your presentations and in the public, who have been the kinds of people coming to you saying that, yeah, I've bought your book, I've read it, I find it interesting, and you know, you've opened up my mind here. So who's been the audience?
Well, I was very conscious that I didn't want to write a book that was exclusive to one audience, you know, and I wanted to obviously make it accessible. That was the first thing. So anybody could pick it up, and you wouldn't need to have heard of any of this stuff to suddenly understand where it was coming from. But at the same time, I mean, I wanted to give insights for people who were already interested, to pull it together, pull the threads together, and if you like, sort of like give them a sort of refresher. And again, I mean, what's come back to me is that it has managed to achieve that. So if you're already into alternative subjects, you know, you'll be going through it and recognizing things that you yourself are interested in, hopefully coming at things with a new angle. I try not to take anything for granted.
Yes.
And it's not uncritical of the alternative world, but at the same time, it is saying, look, there is a reality to some of this. There's a middle ground that we need to be aware of, which, of course, the mainstream media just does not reflect.
Yes.
And so for those people, you've got something there. It bolsters people, I hope, gives them, if you like, some ammunition in a very sort of ready form. But equally, yeah, for the newcomers, it's accessible enough that they will say, hey, I didn't know this was going on in my world. And especially if you look at the end of the book, there's a lot of references, a lot of sources. You know, I'm giving people things where they can go and follow this up, because that's the important thing. You can never tell anybody what to think. At the end of the day, people must make up their own minds, but if you give them enough sources and references, they can go and do that. So, you know, it was very important that I included that too.
Yes, what I found with the book and the way that you've approached in terms of the way you've written it is you have presented the information in a very objective way, and highlighting all of these different issues. But, you know, also maybe getting a few opinions in there as well, but also keeping it quite neutral and just showing the information as it is. And I think when this type of information, because, you know, we take it for granted, people like yourself or like me, you know, I've been into this information since I was very young. It comes very natural to me. But not everybody has picked up this information in that kind of natural way. And maybe now, with the way that things are going, their minds are opening a bit more and they're starting to think in new ways. So, you know, I did find with the way that you presented the writing in the book, it's very encouraging, because it allows the reader to sort of take this information in and think about it, and it's not just thrown at them in a certain way, in a way that maybe other writers may do it, but it's accessible. And I think that's very important for the times that we're in right now, because there is a lot going on out there, you know, with all of these different theories and ideas and things.
Well, no, I mean, you're quite right that actually, I mean, what is encouraging at the moment is that because there are so many things that have actually broken mainstream, whether it be, you know, MPs' expenses or whatever it might be, there's a lot of people that suddenly do not trust authority, and they're now not sure any longer whether they should believe what they're told. And quite sort of everyday normal people feel that in their gut. And you can pick a few subjects, whether it be Princess Diana or David Kelly or whatever. There are certain things where nearly everybody you meet goes, well, that was a conspiracy. And now these are normal everyday folk, and that's where you realize that we've sort of passed a threshold where you don't need to be in an alternative mindset to be feeling that way. So they are the people that actually are becoming more open to wanting to know where to start with all of that. So if you can talk reasonably and rationally to people who are sort of just on the edge of realizing that they might have been presented with a slightly false world through through the mainstream media, you know, that is when I think you can make some headway. And, I mean, the other thing that I think we have to be very careful of, the alternative world has a tendency to get frustrated that it's not being listened to.
Yes.
And therefore, of course, you can overcompensate and try and shout at people, you must believe this, which, of course, is the worst thing you could possibly do. So I've really gone out of my way over the years not to do that, either in presentations or in my writings. So, again, you know, what I'm trying to say is, look, here is an alternative truth. Look at it. There is some evidence to support this. Make up your own minds, but look at the evidence, because part of the problem that we have is that very often people form opinions based on almost no evidence at all, just hearsay. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you've got to bring people to the actual facts of things. And, I mean, just taking one very controversial area, if you just take 9/11, people must make up their own minds about it. But if you look at the polls recently, when the commemorations of the 10th anniversary came up, over 50% of the world's population no longer believes the official story of 9/11, which is quite an astonishing result. But that tells you where people are at today. But again, if you then ask them, okay, what do you know about it? They've sort of heard stuff, but they don't quite know where to start. So, I mean, that's one of the subjects that I pick out in Truth Agenda, and there's a whole chapter devoted to looking at what the areas are that make people question it. And at the end of the day, you've got to make up your own mind, but if you can bring people to the facts, then it's amazing how quickly they'll do the rest of the work themselves.
And I think, like with 9/11 as well, haven't the files been closed until a certain date? I can't remember the date at the moment, but there's certain bits of information that the public are not allowed to know until a certain time. And I suppose that can make, you know, people in general be quite suspicious as to what they are seeing, for those that maybe have always just gone along, you know, never questioned anything, have just always gone along with the flow. There seems to be many holes in things.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, you're saying that, and yes, of course, no authority in power today is going to let anything out that suddenly admits that maybe they haven't told the truth about 9/11. Mm-hmm. But I did think it was very interesting when the David Kelly affair was being questioned again a couple of years ago, and Lord Hutton suddenly decreed that the medical record that would prove whether or not he committed suicide or whether or not there was something more suspicious, Lord Hutton suddenly decreed we will never see the medical records for 70 years.
Yes,
now, immediately, nearly everybody on the street goes, well, that's a bit suspicious, which, of course, it is, because if you've got that evidence, you would have thought you'd be very eager to share it and put to rest any conspiracy theories. But instead, the opposite happens. So, yeah, for sure, you know when they will not release information and evidence and facts, then you know there's a problem. And, of course, that's true for many subjects.
And they've been trying to hijack this term conspiracy theory for quite some time now. And I'm not sure, in my own opinion, if it's actually worked or not. So, I mean, I think some people, if they hear the term conspiracy theory, they think, oh, yes, a bunch of nonsense. But I kind of feel that more and more people are actually, when they hear the term conspiracy theory, their ears kind of buck up a bit, and they're more open to entertaining some of these alternative ideas that maybe a few years back now would have been laughed about. But as you say, there is this mood now coming in, and more now than ever, people are beginning to want to know more, and I guess that's a good thing. The question is, do they really want to know, or is it just cosmetically?
Well, I think it is a very good thing, personally, because if you walk through life with a blindfold on, you know, you might sort of hide from dodgy things that are going on, but it doesn't change them. I think you have to be aware of what's going on. And I mean, it is interesting, though, how you've picked out there the term conspiracy theory. Now, if you look at the dictionary definition of conspiracy theory, it's a very reasonable thing to believe in, i.e., just the basic notion that sometimes people get together and plan things that are covert. Well, you can see that if you look back through history, that you have no end of conspiracy theories. I mean, in a few days' time, we're about to celebrate Bonfire Night in England, and of course that commemorates one of the most famous conspiracies that ever was. And yet they're very reluctant to admit that they might still go on today.
Yes.
But if you look at the dictionary definition, well, it's a very decent thing to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's been turned into a sort of a dirty term. And now you can say, oh, well, you're just a conspiracy theorist. And if somebody in the sort of mainstream media says that, immediately the assumption is the person they're criticizing is an uninformed, stupid person, which is, of course, entirely unfair. But, I mean, I've long thought that those who are, by definition, conspiracy theorists, and I am, because I theorize about possible conspiracies, so by definition I am, we need to almost adopt that like the Quakers back in the 17th century. They adopted the name Quakers when it was originally intended as an insult, because they were, in fact, the religious society of Friends, but people would say, oh, look at you lot quaking in the sight of God, yo-ho-ho. So they thought, well, that's quite good. If we actually use that insult, it'll neutralize it. So they started to call themselves the Quakers, and suddenly the critics were dumbfounded and couldn't really go anywhere with this abusive term anymore. So I think we should sort of think on those lines. If somebody says, well, you're just a conspiracy theorist, the thing to go back and say is, do you actually know what that means?
Yes. Yeah.
And then that's when you realise maybe they don't.
Yeah, that's right.
You know.
So let me just pick up on, because I really want to get into some of the current things that are going on, which obviously your book came out a couple of years ago, and I know you've tried to revise it and update it, but obviously things are moving so quickly.
Indeed.
It's very difficult to keep revising things. So I want to get into some of the more current issues in a few minutes, but I just wanted to just touch on this whole 2012 topic, because I know you devoted a whole section there in your book on the whole 2012 issue, and 2012 is one of those things that's on the lips of many people. Some of us know what 2012 has been about for quite some time. Some people are kind of, falling into it without knowing why, but it's on their lips as well.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, how did you get into that area of research, that kind of prophecy type research? Because I think that's quite interesting in itself, the whole 2012 issue.
It is. I mean, the thing about 2012 is that knowledge of these ancient prophecies, and if anybody out there's listening doesn't know what it means, in brief essence, around the world, many ancient cultures, most famously the Maya people, but not exclusively, they believed in a cycle of time that essentially was 5,125 years. And there's a lot of prophecies associated saying that when this cycle ends and begins again, that there is upheaval, there's transformation for the world. Well, it just so happens that the end of the cycle, according to most scholars of this, is 21st of December 2012. So that means that at the end of next year, we're actually, according to the ancients, entering this new period of shift, of change. Now, some people are expecting everything to happen on one day. I really don't think that is going to happen, and I think we need to be much broader about it. I think it was about an era of shift. It's a symbolic marker point. If you look around you today, you'll see the world is changing. There's social unrest, you've got the Arab uprisings, you've got stuff going on here. You seem to have a lot of weird stuff with climate and magnetic fields changing. There's so much going on that people are beginning to say, well, maybe there was something to this prophecy. And I came across it basically by meeting other people who were exploring unexplained mysteries. I mean, for instance, there's been a number of very spectacular crop formations. Whatever people think of them, there's been a lot of astonishing designs which have straight links to 2012. They're showing parts of the Maya calendar, or they're showing dates, or the planetary alignments for 21st of December 2012. And many crop circles cannot be easily explained away, no matter what you may hear. There's a lot of evidence to say something weird's going on. But that aside, they have introduced, for instance, that topic into that bunch of people. You've got other people who claim they've been up on UFOs, abducted by aliens, and again, people laugh, but then you look at the work of people like John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatry professor. He realized after, hypnotically regressing and interviewing hundreds of witnesses that there was some kind of real phenomenon here. Whether or not it was really happening or happening on a realm of mind, he said it didn't matter almost. And what is interesting is so many of them come back having been given messages in their belief that this time that we're about to enter, 2012 onwards, is going to be a time of change. And so on and so on. You've got psychics coming through saying it. You know, there's so many different levels where people are saying changes in the air. So in this sort of realm that you're in and that I'm in, you quickly, of course, will meet different people who have different ideas about it. And a few weeks ago, you had my partner, Helen Sewell, who's an extremely good astrologer, looking at the astrology of 2012. And that's a whole other area. So after a while, you start to meet these people, exploring it from different aspects, and you think, well, there is a really strong phenomenon here. Because even if you discard the prophecies, you discard the astrology, you discard everything, the fact is there may well be a huge consciousness shift, which is ultimately really what it's meant to be about, because there are enough people who are contemplating the fact that there might be. So it almost becomes, whatever else happens, a kind of a self-fulfilling shift. And I think that's one of the most exciting areas of 2012, that many people are preparing themselves sort of internally, spiritually, the way they live their lives, in anticipation that something might happen. But of course, when you put that all together collectively, there is a change happening anyway, no matter what other big cosmological events or solar flares or whatever it may be. So I think it's a really interesting thing. The problem we're going to have is that you can bet your life when you get to the 22nd of December 2012, all the mainstream media will go, well, there you are, we told you it was rubbish. Because they are the ones that have made it so basic to give the idea that everything's going to happen on one day. And most serious scholars of 2012 do not think that, but they do think that we're at the beginning of a huge time of shift. So, you know, that is the important thing, and it may take years. As Helen says, you know, we might be looking at like 15, 16 years for these events to pass through. The idea that it's all going to happen in one day, I think is, it's too simplistic. And anybody not thinking getting any food in for the day after, they might want to rethink that, because I think we will still be sitting here, whatever else is going on. But who knows what big events might have kicked off in the run-up to that. You know, a lot of people feel that stuff's going to happen next year, again, socially. You've got the Olympics here. Goodness knows what's going to happen. So there's lots of prophecies, lots of predictions. Some will come true, some may not come true, but there is still, at the core of it, a feeling of change, and I don't think anybody can really deny that.
And, you know, going into these prophecies, as you did highlight as well in your own book as well, you know, we have the Hopis as well, talking about this time being the great time of purification. And I think we can see that, you know, with the social unrest that we're finally seeing. I mean, I've been sort of just sitting back and watching these last few years, wondering, okay, so any time now.
Well, I mean,
aren't you going to get a bit angry?
One of the difficulties, though, is that if you're a true conspiracy theorist, of course, you doubt everything. Now, we have people camped up on the steps of St. Paul's, and we have lots of protests going on around the rest of the world. But there is the other school of thought that says that the social unrest is deliberately being sparked by the secret New World Order,
well, this is what I
Illuminati, call them what you will. Because with the theory running that if you can spark enough unrest, you can then bring in the very rules and controls you've always wanted to bring in, sort of through the back door, because people are begging to be more controlled, because they're afraid of rioters, they're afraid of, you know, whatever it may be. And this is the problem. So obviously there is a case to protest. I mean, there is no question. We have a serious problem with, you know, the money world, the bankers and all of that. They clearly do not care very much about everyday folk. I think we can see that. They're in their own world. And there is a case when you've got people at the other end of the ladder who think it's unfair for them to voice that. But the problem is that abused? And some think that there is a manipulation. I mean, there's a lot of people feel that the riots that we just had, for instance, a few months ago, were allowed to spark as badly as they were. I mean, if you look at the first night of it, there was a strange lack of police action. It's almost as if they were told to stand down. And when somebody voiced this on, it was, I think, Question Time on BBC One, a lady actually voiced this. Of course, she was laughed down, because everyone's programmed to laugh.
Yes, I think I saw that one as well, yes.
People are programmed to laugh these ideas down. But in fact, well, some listeners may be surprised to hear how many people do think like that. They think there is a manipulation of this situation that we're in at the moment going on, and of course that is not impossible.
I certainly want to get more into this with you. This is now going into the current events, because I do like that side of the argument, that there is a bigger picture here going on as well, because as we know, the powers that be, they're very much aware of these prophecies, and they're working towards a certain timeline in their own minds. So there is that angle of, are we also being manipulated and our strings being pulled like a puppet? So that's a really good point. But we're going to take a really quick break, just a few minutes, and then when we come back, we'll pick back up on just some of those things we were just touching on. Okay, Andy?
That's great.
Okay. We'll be back in just a minute. That's Jill Scott Heron with The Bottle. So you're listening with me, Valentine St. Aubin, and this is Esoteric Discussions, and we're live here Wednesday night. And my special guest tonight is Andy Thomas, and we're having a very interesting conversation about current events, current times, relating to his book Truth Agenda, but also just the mood of where things are, where we're going. And we've been talking about conspiracy theories, we've been talking about this whole idea of 2012, what it is, what it's not, and Andy was just giving us the flip side of what might be going on as well. We know in the metaphysical community we've been talking about this big shift in consciousness for quite some time. Do the powers that be have something else on their minds as well, knowing that this is going on? Andy, are you back with me?
I'm here.
Okay, so let's pick up where we just left off. You were just getting into talking about how those in control are using some of these events. Let's take the UK riots first of all, as you were just saying, just to highlight, there was some very strange activity going on with the UK riots. I know I saw it. I was watching Sky News of all channels that first night, and I saw the police standing behind the Sky camera crew doing absolutely nothing while a major supermarket was being raided. And even the journalist was just, dumbfounded. He didn't know why they weren't moving in.
No, sure.
So, we had these kind of reports with the UK riots. Have you done further investigations of your own? I'm sure you have. What else have you kind of found out about some of the odd things that were going on, during these riots? Well,
I don't think that we should see, these recent riots in isolation, because obviously history is littered with occasions where agent provocateurs, as they're called, are often introduced into the mix. So you basically send some of your own people along, and you get them to actually spark unrest and trouble.
Yeah.
And that then means you can send in the soldiers, you can send in the police, but you have to let it spark to a large enough sort of degree first of all. And in fact, there was a sort of precursor in more recent times when we had the student protests last year, I believe.
Yeah,
and there was that very strange incident where Prince Charles and
Camilla in the car.
Camilla were in the car off to a film premiere, and it seems very bizarre that although it was known there was a huge student protest going on, and indeed sparking into riots in some places, that they allowed that car and the police accompanying it to enter the area, the very area where the worst trouble was going on. Now you really have to wonder, don't you, whether or not the police do communicate with each other, because you would have thought they would have found another route.
It seems too sloppy, doesn't it?
Well, it seems exceedingly sloppy, and of course then the car was attacked and all the rest of it, as we know. There are many people that think that, again, that the car was really deliberately allowed to be caught up in that, for two reasons. Because number one, obviously, then again it sparks more social unrest. It's going to get coverage. Then that everybody will say how disgraceful, we must control these rioters and all the rest of it. But equally, of course, what it managed to do, and it did, was take away from the very real concerns that the students were trying to express, because very few of them were rioting. There was a minority. Most of the people had a genuine grievance that they wanted to air. But of course, the next day it was all full of shots of Camilla looking shocked,
yes,
and dustbins flying at cars.
Yeah.
So, immediately had taken away from the very serious message that a lot of those young people were trying to give. And again, some people think that what this is a kind of a social engineering. Now, I know some people listening to this will be saying, well, this is outrageous. Who would do such a thing? But if you look back at history, you'll find this goes on over and over. And it's often not until years later that it becomes clear that, in fact, many of these situations were engineered. Because, of course, the more you can bring in control, you usually don't give those powers back after a while. And one of the key conspiracy theories is that we're dealing with what people tend to collectively call the New World Order, which is a plan to put a lot of power into very few hands. But to do that, you therefore have to have, your control agenda. You have to have reasons where you can take more and more control and disempower the population more and more. So there is this argument that not only is that one way they do it, but you have lots of other things. You disempower them with the chemicals that are in the food, the amount of tablets and antidepressants people are being kind of put on, I think, very often entirely unnecessarily.
Well, they're just being used like paracetamol these days, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, in America alone, there's shocking statistics about how many children are on Ritalin, for instance. As soon as they start to show any spark, they are, diagnosed as, whatever it is, being hyperactive, and the next thing you know, they're doped up. There's a lot of people very, very concerned that this is not just a kind of a social accident, but it's actually a very good way of breeding a very apathetic population that, of course, then, when it is abused, whether it be by financial crisis or whatever, is not really in a strong enough state to really stand up and do anything about it, or at least thus far. Now, there's a lot of evidence that, in fact, that plan hasn't entirely worked, because I think there is such a sense of injustice that a lot of people are beginning to find their voice. And, the students last year was a very good example. Students in the UK had really not been very loud at all, whereas, back in the 80s, that kind of young ones type stereotype, a lot of students, they were very sort of out there, having a voice and everything. They'd gone quiet. But now, suddenly, that's changed. And it's not just the younger end. If you go to the other end, you've got a lot of people like the WI and, organizations of more elderly folk who are also standing up for what they believe in. And they're saying, hang on, enough is enough. So this is a very encouraging thing, because people are not taking things lying down. But the danger is, I think we have to be very careful how we respond, because if people do start taking to the streets and, of course, then genuinely rioting or whatever, for whatever their cause may be, it hands to the authorities every reason to crush them. And we have to be ever so careful how we respond in these situations. And it's not an easy, straightforward situation either, of course.
Yes, not at all. And that's been the outcome with these UK riots. After the incident, rights have been taken away. They're trying to hack in now to private text messaging services. We don't have a right anymore to have private text messaging services. The police have to be able to get into any groups and hack in and see what messages are being,
Well, you're indeed right, because the response to the riots was exactly what conspiracy theorists tend to point to. It was the whole population saying, my goodness, this is terrible.
Yes.
Of course, take what powers you want to put this down. And, of course, they do. And then, a week or two later, there's Theresa May standing up saying, let's get rid of the Human Rights Act. And lots of people saying, yes, jolly good.
Yeah.
Of course, which is fine until it's your rights one day that they want to take away.
And of course, the two young boys who were charged for what they said on Facebook, they were charged just a few weeks ago now. I believe they're going to have to do a 4-year sentence.
For sure. No, listen, that doesn't mean they weren't irresponsible in what they said, of course. Yeah. But there is a feeling that, it's very draconian, it's very unbalanced. Some people seem to get off with nothing. Other people were, sentenced to prison for stealing a bottle of water. None of that justifies what they did. But there's this kind of horrible feeling that it's all a sort of a knee-jerk reaction that it's just another excuse to take more control. And the problem with that is, where does it go? Because by this time next year, we'll be beyond the Olympics. London, in particular, next year, is going to be in security lockdown like nothing we've ever seen. And a lot of people obviously are very concerned that somebody might try to abuse that situation. Not only people on the streets, but also the authorities themselves. There's a lot of worry about what is going to happen next year. And again, I think those that genuinely care need to really think carefully about how they respond to this. Because, I mean, one of the things that is no good is trying to fight fire with fire. You know, it's obviously there's every reason to be angry with certain rules that are brought in or certain conspiracies that may be going on, but just to then sort of shake your fist and rage, that's not a solution. We need constructive, positive thought. And I mean, one of the areas that I do stress in the Truth Agenda, particularly in the last section of it, to end it on a positive note, I spend quite a lot of time talking about the power of positive consciousness. Because, as you alluded to earlier on, that there is no doubt that what we think and how we think makes a profound difference, not just in the social domino effect, but there's a lot of scientific evidence now, even going on at Princeton University, that shows that what we all collectively focus on, what we think and what our intention is changing the whole energetic environment around us. And that can have a dramatic effect. And so therefore, I think we all need to be very careful we don't fall into fear. Because, of course, some of what we're talking about here all sounds very fearful and it's all very dark, which, of course, you have to deal with that. But we have to make sure we don't then succumb to that. If we come from a fear mentality in our actions trying to offset this, if you like, obviously the danger is we'll then create more fear. And that is the opposite, of course, of what we ought to be doing.
Well, I think that's very, very well said. And, you know, and I do know the argument, yes, these types of subjects are a bit heavy, they're a bit dark, as one friend of mine said, a bit apocalyptic, you know.
Sure.
And to be honest, I don't see it in those ways. That's just my own personal opinion. I think what we're talking about is reality. There's a lot going on out there, and as you say, we do have to be very plugged in, using our minds all the time, so that we're not being pulled or pushed in any kind of way to, you know, give that kind of reaction that those in authority are hoping that we will, you know, that will create that kind of reaction that they want, so that they can take more of our rights away. We are in a very fine line right now of the kind of world we're going to be living in come the future. So, you know, we've covered quite a lot of different subjects in a very short amount of time. And I hope that maybe the audience tonight will get a feel for some of what we've been talking about. Yes, we know, 2012 is coming up. There's a mood out there. There's a shift in consciousness. But you also have to keep your mind. You have to keep the balance. And I think that's also what you're trying to present as well tonight as well. It's looking at both sides of the coin and keeping your mind open.
Yeah, very much so, yes.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Andy, for joining me tonight. It's been very, very enlightening. And as I said, I think your book was excellent. And I think anyone who would like to get a good feel for any of these kinds of subjects, because it's such a wide range of subjects that you've written about. We've got the 7/7 bombings, 9/11. I mean, 9/11 is a whole, fish tank in itself. The methods of control, all of these things, they're all in this book. So what's your website? Just tell us your website quickly.
Yeah, if anybody wants to take a look, it's www.truthagenda.org, truthagenda.org, and there's lots of stuff about the book and me, and if you want to know where I'm lecturing and stuff like that, it'll all be up there.
Because you do quite a lot of lectures around.
I do, yeah, often travelling up and down the country, so, it might be a chance to come and catch me somewhere.
And do you have any other new books coming out anytime soon?
I am working at the moment on a new book, which obviously I can't speak too much about, but it is back in these realms, trying to take a broader look at all of this. But we're probably looking for another year or so before that sees the light of day. But yeah, I'm working away. Okay.
Well, good luck with everything, and thanks for joining me tonight.
It's been a pleasure.
And I'm going to close your mic now. And so that's going to wrap it up for tonight, guys. It's been another one of those quick kinds of shows. It goes so quickly. I just, never enough time. But the whole point of of the radio show that I'm doing, and the reason why I'm doing it on community radio is for it to be like a taster. You know, it's up to you to go out there and find this information for yourself and say, oh, you know, I want to learn more, you know, so I'm going to do the legwork that I need to do to educate myself. So we'll be back with another show as usual, not next week, but the week after that. But until next time, as I always say, keep your eyes on the stars.
One station, many communities. It's